John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Norwood Park Township, near Chicago, Illinois. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. Gacy committed all of his murders inside his ranch-style house in Norwood Park Township. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and dupe them into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick. He would then rape and torture his captive before killing them by either asphyxiation or strangulation with a garrote. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space of his home, and 3 others were buried elsewhere on his property. 4 were discarded in the Des Plaines River. Inside Gacy's home, his usual modus operandi was to ply a youth with drink, drugs, or generally gain his trust. He would then produce a pair of handcuffs to show a magic trick, sometimes as part of a clowning routine. He typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then surreptitiously released himself with the key which he hid between his fingers. He then offered to show his intended victim the trick. With his victim restrained, Gacy proceeded to rape and torture his captive. He frequently began by sitting on or straddling his victim's chest before forcing the victim to fellate him. Gacy then inflicted acts of torture, including burning with cigars, making his captive imitate a horse as he sat on their back and pulled upon makeshift reins around their necks, and violation with foreign objects such as dildos and prescription bottles after he had sodomized his captive. To immobilize his captive's legs before engaging in acts of torture, Gacy frequently manacled their ankles to a 2x4 with handcuffs attached at each end, an act inspired by the Houston mass murders. He also verbally taunted many of his victims throughout their continued abuse and was known to have partly drowned several victims in the bathtub before repeatedly reviving them. Gacy typically murdered his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their neck before progressively tightening the rope with a hammer handle. Occasionally, the victim had convulsed for an hour or two before dying, although several victims died by asphyxiation from cloth gags stuffed deep into their throat. Except for his 2 final victims, all were murdered between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. After death, Gacy usually stored the victims' bodies under his bed for up to 24 hours before burying his victim in the crawl space, where he periodically poured quicklime to hasten decomposition. Some victims' bodies were taken to his garage and embalmed prior to their burial. Gacy's first known murder occurred on January 3, 1972. According to Gacy's later account, following a family party on the evening of January 2nd, he decided to drive to the Civic Center in the Loop to view a display of ice sculptures in the early hours of the following morning. He then lured a 16-year-old named Timothy Jack McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal into his car. McCoy was on his way to his father's home in Omaha, Nebraska, and informed Gacy his connecting bus to Nebraska was not due until noon. Gacy took McCoy on a sightseeing tour of Chicago, and then drove him to his home with the promise that he could spend the remainder of the night and be driven back to the station in time to catch his bus. Prior to McCoy's identification, he was known simply as the Greyhound busboy. Gacy claimed he woke early the following morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom doorway holding a kitchen knife. He then jumped from his bed and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm. Gacy twisted the knife from McCoy's wrist, banged his head against the bedroom wall, kicked him against his wardrobe, and walked towards him. McCoy kicked Gacy in the stomach, doubling him over. Gacy then grabbed McCoy, shouting, "Motherfucker, I'll kill you!" He then wrestled McCoy to the floor and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest. As McCoy lay dying, Gacy claimed he washed the knife in his bathroom, then went to his kitchen and saw an opened carton of eggs and a slab of unsliced bacon on his kitchen table. McCoy had also set the table for 2. He had walked into Gacy's room to wake him while absent-mindedly carrying the kitchen knife in his hand. Gacy buried McCoy in his crawl space and later covered his grave with a layer of concrete. In an interview several years after his arrest, Gacy said that immediately after killing McCoy, he felt totally drained, yet noted that as he stabbed McCoy and as he listened to the gurgulations and gasping for air that he had experienced a mind-numbing orgasm. He added, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." On the afternoon of December 11th, 1978, Gacy visited the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines to discuss a potential remodeling deal with the store owner, Phil Torf. While he was within earshot of 15-year-old part-time employee Robert Peast, Gacy mentioned his firm often hired teenage boys at a starting wage of $5 per hour, almost double the pay Peast earned at the pharmacy. Shortly after Gacy left the pharmacy, Peast's mother arrived at the store to drive her son home so the family could celebrate her birthday together. Peast asked his mother to wait, adding that, "Some contractor wants to talk to me about a job." He left the store at 9 p.m., promising to return shortly. Peast was murdered shortly after 10 p.m. at Gacy's home. Gacy later stated that at his house he gave Peast a soft drink before asking whether there was anything he wouldn't do for the right price, to which Peast replied that he did not mind working hard. In response, Gacy stated good money could be earned by hustling, although Peast was dismissive. Gacy then duped Peast into donning handcuffs before saying, "I'm going to rape you, and you can't do anything about it," as Peast began weeping. Gacy's subsequent statements regarding the events to unfold varied, although in one of his initial statements, he claimed Peast failed to resist as he removed the boy's trousers. He also stated that as he placed the rope around Peast's neck, the boy was crying, scared. Gacy admitted to having received a phone call from a business acquaintance as Peast lay dying, suffocating on his bedroom floor. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Peast led to Gacy's arrest on December 21, 1978. His conviction for 33 murders by one individual then covered the most homicides in United States legal history. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994.